So we don't want to stand between you and the boarding passes at the airport, some of you with bags. So let's have fun, quick, and informative. So let's do that. First round of intros. Oleg, program manager, work on CDM.
Hello, I'm Robert. I'm architect on CDM as well as several additional products.
So what we're going to cover today, so briefly, we're going to intro CDM. We're going to learn about common data model ecosystem. That's what you want to learn, how to use it, where it's being used, and what value it adds to all the solutions that you'd like to build, and what are the value it adds to Microsoft products. We're going to go over them. Then we have a call to action and Q&A, everyone's favorite. Sounds good? Well, a little bit more enthusiasm, guys.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, I understand it's early morning, but you see, okay, common data model. Who heard of common data model? Woo, yeah, I told you, these are the people who really want to learn about it. So brief recap of what the common data model, also known as CDM, is. It's basically a well-known schema with semantic meanings. What does that mean? So instead of just saying you what shape of a data it is, like the name and the data type, it also captures in a standard way meanings of that data. So it's not just a string that says city, but it will allow you to say that this is actually a location city. So it has rich semantics for domains, for industries, for transactional apps, what have you. So whatever domain that you'd like to cover. It enables also the machine learning and machine reasoning over the metadata. So your ML algorithms and whatnot doesn't have to make guesses about what the data is. It can have an upfront, explicit understanding, and all the things can be out of the box to enable out-of-the-box AI, so you don't have to do any of the bringing things together and custom wiring it every time. And common data service in Dynamics, Power BI, Office Graph, and Azure Synapse, they all natively speak CDM. They understand CDM. So that's what the power of the ecosystem is, as we're adding the CDM capabilities to all our software. That becomes a much better story for you, so that all of them speak the same language, so you don't have to do a job every time you move the data across. And we have also the Open Data Initiative, which is a consortium-driven use of common shapes and common meanings. And we also enable the ISV story with CDM. Because if you want to build a solution, and later in the presentation we're going to touch on it, want to build a solution that uses common data model, you can do it as consistently as the first parties. Does that sounds good? Great. CDM landscape, that's my favorite slide. It basically shows you like most Redmond campus and beyond. So you can see that we have the dimension up on the top is like CDM applicability. It goes from no code to high code on the right. What does that mean? It means that you have completely out of the box, no code required capabilities built into the products. But if you are a data scientist or a data engineer who are the ISV who really needs to build a custom solution, you can do that using the same technologies that we make available out of the box. And you see up on the top, there are out of the box products, for example, Power BI, Dynamics, or Office 365. And the bottom rectangles basically show you how it interoperates with the data lake. So the data in CDM folders with rich semantics lands in a lake that can be further processed along the way. And the semantics are shared, so your data scientist, an analyst, a data engineer, they don't have to lose any of the metadata along the way. So it allows this multi-role operation of data processing, which is great. So you don't have to reinvent that every time. And the data is very heterogeneous. It's not limited to any specific type of data. As you can see, it's an observational data, it's a transactional data, it's analytical data, and it's all captured in the same schematics and semantic model. Isn't that exciting? Are you going to use it? Robert will show you how we use it and how you can have a great value out of it.
All right, so let's dive into a few specific examples. So what I will do over the next probably 20 plus minutes is giving you various examples where you see experiences enabled by ultimately underneath common data model and the semantics of data. And it's really a means to an end, right? It's not that we do this because we want to, I don't know, right, have philosophical discussions over metadata. It's really about what are the experiences and the value that we can enable and how can this benefit you and your customers. But then also, right, how can you build on all the things that may be available throughout these different tools and platforms and can build your own solutions on top of that. And so let's start with ultimately right, you saw there was the Dynamics data, there was also Power BI and Power Platform data flows. And so in Power BI, I guess maybe show of hands, who has used Power BI data flows in particular in the past? Okay, a few of you have used it. So you may have used it to connect, right, to your particular sources of data and ultimately create analytics off of that data. What I have here is already one pre-created data flow that I created last night, and that one, right, connects to Dynamics 365 business-oriented data. And in this case, right, I bring in B2B accounts, B2C contacts, right, sales orders or opportunities and so on, and leads. And so I can build a dashboard over that data, right? Because the data is in a particular shape, well-defined shape, and I could build a dashboard over it. Now, the interesting part is that, right, I may have other CRM systems where I track my leads and opportunities. And so I could, of course, right, using Power Query within Power BI data flows, I can use it to connect to many different sources. And so you will see right, various categories of sources coming up. But what I want to draw your attention to is this bottom section of templates. And so I don't know if you've seen this. We made this available publicly in recent months. Templates are really pre-packaged connectivity in the sense of you don't just get raw connectivity to certain systems, but it also immediately packages transforms and shaping of the data. And so in this particular case, right, I showed you I had connected to Dynamics data, bringing in data that is actually defined in common data model form for leads, opportunities, and so on. In this particular case, I'm connecting to Salesforce data. I'm already signed in, and all I did is, right, I'm just using the template as is. And if you look at this template, it comes with a set of predefined queries. So I don't have to, right, connect myself to the various Salesforce objects in this case, right, pick out the fields and figure out the understanding, right, of the fields. The template has actually a well-defined set of steps that you can all inspect, right, but basically comes out of the box with these steps that take the Salesforce shape of the data and ultimately map it to CDM standard entities. So you see here, right, there's a longer list of well-defined, I guess, predefined standard entities that is available. You can also have your custom entities. And ultimately, the template, right, has this predefined mapping so that the data, right, just using this template, actually gets automatically reshaped into the same shape of the data that I got in through the Dynamics 365 system. At which point, right, I can use the template as is, or if you have extended your Salesforce deployment and added extra fields, right, you can easily build on top of this existing template and just add these extra fields and benefit from everything that is already there. And so as I basically hit save here, ultimately it validates all the basically the queries in the template that these are valid against the particular Salesforce deployment. And then I can save this as a new data flow. And it basically shows me that this new data flow, and I can, right, execute it, right, to populate with the data, but it basically shows me, okay, this data flow has, right, these objects around account, contact, all these well-defined fields in those standard entity forms, which actually matches, right, this structure here for the Salesforce one, matches the structure that I've also done with Dynamics 365. So now I can more easily build applications that ultimately are decoupled from the original source system, leveraging, right, in this case, underneath the semantic information and the structural information described for CDM, and I can bind against the shapes of data, and I don't have to, right, ultimately build out all these separate applications. So this was a quick example, right, of certain specific out-of-the-box standard entities and how ultimately, right, we have I guess, templates that are available directly in this experience. What we're also working on regarding templates is to enable you and your organization to customize. You can definitely save those things as new data flows. But in some cases, you may actually want to define your organizational templates that you use within your organization because you have certain systems that are custom, but you want to share this with other users. So these are things that we are working towards so that you can ultimately also define those and share those within your organization. Now, this is just a quick recap. What you saw is that as far as the data flows experience is concerned, which is embedded within Power BI, it's also embedded within Power Platform. So that was released just a couple of weeks ago as a broad preview in part of Common Data Service and Dynamics. So the same experience is embedded there. And I will show in a few minutes examples where the same data flow experience is also then embedded in, for example, Dynamics Customer Insights, as well as what was announced earlier this week as part of wrangling data flows in Azure Data Factory. So you get this high productivity visual data transform experience that you can leverage, and you don't necessarily have to write code to do this. And so the underlying technology is also used in Power BI Desktop and in Excel. So if you're in Excel, if you go to get data, you ultimately also use Power Query underneath. And so it has this mapping functionality to standard entities and has out-of-box templates. Now, with some of the out-of-the-box standard entity definitions, they may cover certain business transactional areas. Let's say sales, customer service, field service, marketing, and so on. What we're also working on with industry partners is to extend this to very specific vertical scenarios that are specific to. And here you see the examples of things that we have already released. We have several more in the works, but these are all the ones released in education, higher education, in healthcare, in financial services, in nonprofit, and also in automotive. And so in those cases, the industry accelerators are more than just defining data model for those particular verticals. They actually also define solutions around particular use cases. And so those accelerators are available, made available by Microsoft for free on top of Dynamics, as well as analytical dashboards for Power BI. And partners have been building up solutions. And so you see a number of these partners listed that they build out then their specific use cases, let's say around healthcare patient care management. And the benefit for the partners of building out some of these solutions and building it on top of these well-defined, shared common data model entities is that their solutions become, for those key areas of information, like patients, practitioners, diagnosis, in the case of healthcare, they become interoperable. And so in that case, those particular partner solutions can focus on their particular use case and their particular scenarios that they want to differentiate with in their solution. And they can go to market with, for example, another partner that focuses on the analytics side and builds Power BI, packaged Power BI solutions that work over those specific data model entities that are defined, that are used by the patient care management, more transactional app. And so this is how we are extending continuously, an example of how we are extending continuously the common data model, and also not just extending it for the sake of, OK, we have more and more entities, but no, really having an ecosystem of applications that really manage their data in exactly those well-defined forms, and not just structurally, but also with semantics that is on top of that. Now, so I brought up the point about Dynamics 365 and the Common Data Service, which is a platform underneath these industry accelerators. It's also a platform for various business applications. And so I want to show how to get insights easily from your business data. And so for that, what I have here is, so this is a common data service which sits underneath. It's a managed data platform that sits underneath Dynamics applications, but you can use it also as standalone with Power Apps to build your particular business applications. And this is just a quick instance that comes with certain predefined entities. When you see, again, account, you see contact, this is kind of the out-of-the-box set of entities. And as you install applications, they may extend those entities. They may define additional entities. So all of this is really managed right, automatically for you. You don't have to, right, think of it as a managed database plus, right, business logic platform. That makes it very easy for you to write applications. There have been sessions this week, right, around Power Apps. So if you didn't catch them, I encourage you to go there, right, of how easily, without writing code, you can, right, really develop these business applications and deploy them at scale within your organization. A new capability that we added, right, so you have the transactional side of it, but when you want to do analytics at scale, and let's say combine this with other data and do machine learning and enrichment, yes, you could connect to that underlying system and pull the data out, right? In the sense of you connect to it, you pull all the data out, and then you, right, have a snapshot of that data, and then you run your analytics on top of that. The tricky thing about this is, right, well, this transactional system, right, keeps updating. And so how do you, right, then keep your analytics up to date? And so then you would have to maybe do, right, constantly refresh, right, that data. And that one is, right, yes, there's solutions available today. What we've recently added is a built-in capability here that you can, right, directly do from here, where you want to export that data on a continuous basis and incrementally to your data lake. And so this is really simple. In this particular environment, I haven't, right, linked this to a data lake yet. So all I have to do is I just enter this particular flow. I select my subscriptions. So I have access to many subscriptions. And so I just pick, right, what is my subscription? I put this in the East US into a particular data lake. And from this point, it asks me, OK, so what are all the entities that I would like to have continuously pushed into my data lake as effectively data snapshots, not as, right, like a change log of things which you would have to then, right, do complex analytical processing, but rather, right, seeing this as data snapshots that you can directly use, right, be it Power BI, be it Excel, be it, right, Azure Machine Learning, and so on, right, and having them updated on a continuous fashion. And so all I do here is I just selected all the entities that happen to be in this particular environment. And what's happening now is it automatically sets up for me underneath. It sets up, OK, the data lake environment. It sets up the necessary system on the common data service side to continuously set up, right, pushing that data. And as data changes happen, so it takes a few seconds, so it has configured all of this, right? I didn't have to provision any separate ETL, right, or manage this. This is automatically managed. And so this is in progress, right? And so I can look at this. It has already started synchronizing, right, data. So you see, right, even within the first few seconds, so if I refresh the page, we'll probably see, OK, it has already, right, not all of these entities out of the box. I'll just, right, put sample data in it. But you can see that, right, a bunch of these are already completed, right, in terms of, OK, data flowing into the data lake. And it just happens continuously. And so as transactional updates may happen by your business applications running on top of this system, it will basically automatically, right, see that, oh, this changed, so that the data lake needs to be updated. You don't have to worry about, right, setting up any ETL or so. And the important thing is the data here doesn't land just as raw data, where you then, when you connect, right, as a business user or business analyst from that data, you would have to then infer, well, what is the meaning of this particular field versus that field? There's actually a lot of metadata that automatically goes with that data. Basically, all the metadata that you have in this common data service, as you have created those entities, is automatically attached to this. And so from here, I can go, right, to the underlying storage account. So if I open this, it takes just a few seconds to log into the Azure portal. And it will bring up, I'll open the Storage Explorer. And so in this case, right, so this is that environment. You can see, I'll zoom in a little bit, right? You can see that for all the entities that I had in the system, it basically created folders here, right? It lays out the data in a certain partitioning scheme. It automatically partitions the data. It automatically keeps it up to date. And as, let's say, I install a new application in my environment, that application extends, right, adds extra attributes on an existing entity, all those things automatically taken care of, right? Basically, this automatic and continuous pushing of data into the lake will also take care of, ultimately, schema evolution of reflecting those additional attributes in those data files. So you don't have to go back, right, and worry about this. It just automatically takes care. The important part, right, is that, OK, all these particular data partitions, are laid out, and there's metadata associated with this, right? And this is basically what makes it a CDM folder, which really, right, all the different tools, Power BI, right, and others that I will show in a moment, can understand. So those tools basically look for this metadata, and based on that metadata, they can then understand, okay, in this folder, here's all the entities, here how they're related to each other, here is, right, information about data types, here's information about semantic types of particular fields and entities. And so this is how we make sure that semantics that you have built around your business applications and the data underneath carries into the data lake, and then from the data lake can be consumed from a variety of other applications, ultimately based on this well-defined definition of CDM standard entities, as well as the metadata system that describes how the data is laid out physically in the data lake and how applications can consume that. And so if we look at then, just as a quick recap, right, what you saw here was ultimately on the left-hand side, right, the common data service as a managed data platform. And I configured continuously pushing that data into an Azure data lake. And ultimately, right, there's an SLA where we're saying, okay, the data, any changes that happen within less than an hour in the data lake, well, you saw how quickly it was that actually within seconds, right, it started populating things. So it really depends on the load of the system, but generally, right, it keeps those things up to date. And there's a variety of consuming applications. And some of them you may be familiar with, right? You may have used Power BI. You may have used, right, some of the Azure data services. But there's also SaaS application, right, such as Customer Insights or Sales Insights that use this mechanism underneath to ultimately do analytics at scale, do machine learning over the data, and provide you a lot of out-of-box value over that data that is from your business applications. And so to give you right, a quick example is I'll pick Customer Insights here and show you, right, a few things. So Customer Insights, if you haven't heard about it, Customer Insights is really a SaaS application that is in the category of customer data platforms, which is about connecting, right, to all your organization's data, enabling you to ultimately relate the data easily to each other, right, and derive insights. Let's say that you're in the retail industry and you basically have information about your customers in terms of sales orders, you have information about, right, maybe newsletter signups, you have information about maybe you sell high-value goods and you have, right, service plans and so on. So you have information about, right, service support cases, right, maybe field servicing and those things. And so now, you may have these different, right, systems on different platforms. Some of this may be Dynamics applications. Some of this may be, right, other, right, CRM applications. Some of it may be custom-built systems. And right, when you have right, all this data across the different systems, the keys will not naturally line up. Right? It's not necessarily that, okay, this one, I don't know, custom ID in this one system and this custom ID in the other system will have, right, exactly the same key, and you can do effectively foreign keys across, right, these disparate systems. So you need something that helps you relate the data, unify it. And in some cases, it means also, right, ultimately doing fuzzy matching because, right, you have high-quality curated data, like your right, delivery data and sales order shipping data. That tends to have high-quality address data. But when it comes to, right, somebody just goes to the website and signs up for information, well, they probably, right, the phone number or the address may not be the most accurate one. So you need a way of reasoning over those things, and Customer Insights enables you to do a lot of this, right, without having to write any code and doing this with a high productivity experience. And so this is an environment where I've already pre-populated right, a couple of data sources. Right, there's a few things I'm pulling out of a point of sale system, right, website data. And so some of this, right, is brought in through, right, importing data. Right, the import data experience is exactly that data flow experience that right, you saw earlier in the context of the templates. But there's also this additional experience, right, the second part, which is Customer Insights can connect directly to a common data model folder in any data lake. And in that case, it's not really an import where it pulls the data out, right, and does processing, and it takes time, right, for the data to show up. It just directly attaches to that data in the data lake, and can immediately make use of that data because the CDM folder has metadata that tells then customer insights, well, what is this data about? How is it related? What is the meaning of the data? So let's go through this. Let's select connect to a common data model folder. Let's give it a name. I guess I call it D365 Ignite for this demo. And so for this account name, it's actually, the one that I used just a few seconds ago from my CDS environment. I put this into the Robert demo account. The access key is already populated from, I guess, my autofill cache. And this is ultimately the container name, the storage container name. Actually, I guess I had it staged on the other one. So this is the storage container name. I'll just copy it.
So you've seen the data flow to the lake. Now we're using that data to attach to customer insights to get really cool insights out of it.
And so all I did is I just specified the location of the data lake where out of my other system, out of my business transactional system, I was just constantly pushing data from my transactions into that data lake. And so what it does is it discovers, hey, there's this metadata description file, and it also can handle that you just pointed at the root of a lake that has lots and lots of data. At this point, it allows you to select, hey, which parts of your data lake you want to do. In this case, at only this one environment of my common data service in the data lake. And so it immediately discovers, okay, there's this long list of entities, about my contacts, accounts, and so on that is available. And all I'm going to do is I say save. And what this does is it attaches now the data in the data lake that is pushed by another system and updated by another system constantly into the lake. Customer insights can basically attaches to this data and can reason over the data and use it for all the enrichments and insights that you want to create. And so it takes a few moments for it basically to register all the metadata. It actually doesn't move any of the data. So basically, in this particular case, it just registers metadata. The data still resides in the data lake. And as far as further processing is happening inside Customer Insights, it will ultimately do all that processing by going back to the lake, looking at the latest data snapshots that are basically maintained in that data lake, and then operate from that data. And so now, and you also see there isn't, there specifically is not a refresh timestamp here, because it basically means this data is whatever's in the data lake. And the other application that I showed earlier in the demo, that one just keeps the data up to date. So there is no notion of refresh here. It's just, it uses the data as is whenever you kick off, whenever the unifying steps are running of how you ultimately want to reason over the data. Now, an additional example I want to briefly show is Customer Insights out of the box has, because it's all about customer information, how to relate different aspects to customers. It's not an empty analytical environment. It actually has out of the box a predefined object that is about customer. And that object, and of course you can extend it to your needs, but that object has a certain structure. And in addition, I want to point out, there's also this part here, You may be thinking, yes, okay, you may have a customer's name, or address, and so on, and there's certain data types that come with it. But there's additional semantic types, and this is also based on the common data model of the application understanding some of these key semantic types of, well, this is not just a string, but this is really a location of a city, or this is supposed to be a phone number. And where this becomes then really valuable is when it comes to ultimately creating, when we go to matching rules, when you need to relate different data sets to each other that come from disparate systems, and you don't have keys, that of how you can directly create these correlations. So you can define these matching rules, and when you look here, the system understands some of the semantics. So it has an understanding of basically saying, well, when it comes to consumer data and email addresses are a pretty good candidate when you want to merge website signups with other email addresses you have about the orders that you have fulfilled for that customer. And so in this case, it should do a high precision match, when it relates the data to each other. But when it comes to things like the full name, there may be right, different variations of the name. There may be, right, typos. There may be, right, different things. So you cannot really do an exact, precise match. And so in this case, the system actually for this rule will suggest when it matches, it should actually do a match based on, right, fuzzy matching and using, right, a lower threshold in terms of, right, how to relate things to each other. Now, it also knows, the system here, that when it comes to names, somebody called, right, Joe Smith, if it finds, right, multiple Joe Smiths across different data sets, well, Joe Smith is a very common name. So even with a precise match, it isn't sufficient to basically do that match, right? And so this is also why, yes, you have these rules where, okay, it will primarily match, for example, on email address and only secondarily match on name. But right, enabling such an experience and having, right, semantic understanding built into the system and getting that semantic understanding out of the source systems, right, carried forward into this experience will help you be much more productive and much more confident, right, of like really creating rules that are creating outcomes that basically create real value for your customers. Now, what we've covered is, right, okay, connecting to, right, different systems, bringing data in, as well as attaching to data in the data lake. And a little bit earlier in the session, right, we also mentioned the Open Data Initiative. And so this is, right, this is not released publicly yet, but this is basically an experience, that experience where I showed you can ultimately connect, right, to a CDM data folder. Similarly, for the Open Data Initiative, there will be an experience where you can directly connect to, right, data lake locations that describe the data in that form, and Customer Insights ultimately has, right, that understanding where it can also understand the data, not just structurally, but also understand the semantics. And so when it comes to then, right, it can auto map the data, right, then to, okay, what is the specific semantics of particular fields, and again, participate in this unification process in a much more effective way than, right, having just raw data. If you, I don't know, bring in CSV files where there's no metadata whatsoever, and you need human intelligence to reason over, well, what is the meaning of this field versus that field? But with this one, you actually have specific semantic metadata that the software can reason for you and basically make suggestions of, hey, the software understands this is a name, the software understands this is a phone number, this is an address, and it can suggest to you, these are good rules that maybe, right, can be used for matching this. And so ultimately, right, what then Customer Insights enables you is creating, right, in this case, profiles. This is an example of a profile that takes all, right, this information together and gives you insights over specific customers, right? And right, this is an example of what Customer Insights does today in terms of also gives you insights of, for this particular customer in this age group and the zip code and so on. It enriches data automatically, for example, with brand affinities, or right, on what products they may be most affinitized to based on maybe past purchase history. You can also, right, ultimately do things like scoring, right, with a churn score. And Customer Insights has a built-in experience of how you can ultimately create, right, churn models without, right, really, I guess, needing a data scientist and, right, writing code and doing all of that. So it has an experience with AI Builder, which you may have, right, there were sessions earlier in the week that went into depth of how AI Builder ultimately can be used to build machine learning models in a much quicker way and reuse them. But at the same time, right, you may have a situation where, right, AI Builder is really focused on simplicity of getting you, right, to results very quickly. In some cases, right, you may have to go further. You may have to go beyond what the particular application allows you to do. And this is where it really is about, okay, how can you leverage, right, your data scientists in the organization who are a scarce resource, right? You want to make sure you use their time as effectively as possible, and your data engineers, right, you don't want them to do a lot of, right, mundane tasks or having to do lots of things of, right, let's say they want to build a custom churn model on top of all this great data that we have brought into Customer Insights, that we have enriched, that we have unified. So there's a lot of value in this right now, unified data, and it's described with CDM metadata. So how can we leverage all this data then in experiences, right, that give you the full power of Azure? And so this is where ultimately we have done work such that all the data that you have in Customer Insights underneath is really managed in a data lake in CDM folder form with that metadata. Azure Synapse, announced earlier this week, ultimately can access that data directly. So now from within Azure Synapse, you can leverage the full power of your data engineers, your data scientists, over that data directly, not as an, oh, I have to go and somehow get the data out of Customer Insights, or out of other SaaS applications, and manage an ETL process, and do all sorts of work before my data scientists can even get started. No, in this case, this is basically immediately available. And so to show you this briefly, so this was my Customer Insights environment. Ultimately, this is the underlying data lake storage account where you see what we brought in earlier. So these are all the various entities from the D365 Ignite environment. There's other entities in terms of actually various enrichments that are done. And so when I switch over to my Azure Synapse workspace, I've basically, all I did is I created this workspace and I linked it to my Customer Insights environment underneath. And what this linking really means is that when it comes to the data tab, basically the storage account, so it's specifically this storage account here that I just showed you in the Azure portal, and this Customer Insights file system in that storage account is exactly basically the data that I just looked at on the underlying data lake, and it's data that Customer Insights is operating over. So that data is directly accessible to the different applications that are part of Azure Synapse. So now I can do further enrichment of data with Azure Data Factory. I can do ultimately Spark queries on top of that data. I can create my custom machine learning models, leveraging my data scientists, and I can bring the results back again into Customer Insights. Because as I showed earlier, Customer Insights can simply attach to data lake storage and can understand CDM folders. So the output of operations that are performed inside Azure Synapse is, again, CDM folders. So those CDM folders are then, I can reattach them to Customer Insights. So I have the seamless story where I have a high productivity experience, SaaS experience of connecting to data, relating data, getting a lot of value and enrichments out of the box. But I can then extend and build on top of that with Azure Synapse, bring in all my Azure experts, as well as partner ecosystem, and partner solutions, and the results of those things can be leveraged back into Customer Insights. And so I'll show a few quick examples of experiences that are not public yet, but they basically will be released before the end of calendar year. And so just to set this up, Azure Synapse is really a combination of multiple technologies into a single experience. And it allows you to ultimately attach to a storage, and it actually increasingly leverages more and more of that metadata that is associated with those CDM folders to power experiences on top where you can use different runtimes. You can use SQL as a runtime, you can use Spark as a runtime to query the data, to transform the data, to do machine learning, and so on. And then, of course, you have an ecosystem of tools that can consume that data, and the data is ultimately represented then in CDM folders, which means, okay, the tools that speak those, understand that particular metadata, they are not just looking at raw data, they actually understand semantics of that data. And so with Azure Synapse, you can really then cover this broad range from ingesting and storing data to preparing, transforming data, analyzing it, enriching it, and then ultimately also serving queries, high concurrency queries, as well as building visualizations from it with Power BI. And there were sessions earlier in the week that went into more details. For the purpose of this session around Common Data Model, I want to show things that are coming very soon, which is as part of Azure Data Factory and the mapping data flows, there's a new experience coming that specifically maps to and from CDM data. And so now, there's basically, one of the aspects is that there's the sync format where you simply specify, well, whatever I do in my Azure Data Factory mapping data flow, I want the data to land in common data model format because I want to maybe use it from other tools. It's as simple as that, right? And then in terms of the mapping, there's ultimately, right, Azure Data Factory will allow you to, and again, this will be available, the preview before end of calendar year, that you can map to the same standard entities that I showed at the beginning. Remember, right, when I showed Salesforce data mapped to certain CDM standard entities? You can do the same thing here in Azure Data Factory. You can basically point to, right, very well-defined objects like, okay, what does a sales order look like in, right, the standard entity? But at the same time, what you see here is, right, that there's really the option of not just pointing to, okay, the standard curated entities that you may see right on the CDM GitHub repository and the public repository, but you can also point it then to your, right, ultimately your organizational definitions of, right, what you and your organization have defined as these are your specific entities and you want to drive certain standardization, and so you can utilize those things directly from within here. And this is built then directly into Azure Data Factory. So it's not an add-on library. There's already an example today where you can use an add-on library. This will become native functionality in Azure Data Factory, available, planned to be available before the end of the year. Now, this was kind of enriching data, bringing data, mapping data. With Spark in Azure Synapse, you can ultimately, right, create new folders, read folders, process them, right, and write them. And with Spark, one of the things that everybody does is, well, when you attach to data, first thing is you create data frames. And if you just have CSV files, well, there's not that much, right, intelligence that can be gained from just CSV files in terms of the data frames. So there's add-on that is also being released as a preview very soon that basically allows you to leverage a library, CDM library in Spark, in Synapse Spark as well as Databricks Spark, that allows you to auto-generate these data frames. And when it auto-generates the data frames, it actually leverages all the metadata that exists already in the CDM folder. So it's not just, right, okay, looking at, I don't know, CSV data files with no metadata. It actually understands all that metadata. And then ultimately can, right, use this for any output that gets generated, makes it again CDM folders. And so finally, right, you saw in this original picture, there was additional systems, including Office data. And so I want to spend a brief moment, right, of how you can more easily gain now insights from Office data, ultimately also powered by CDM metadata. And so what was released earlier this week by our colleagues in the Office organization is an Azure Data Factory template that basically can connect, right, if you're an Office 365 customer, you have, right, your emails, your meetings, right, your organization manages those things in Office 365. You can query as an individual user, you can query through the graph, right, what are my emails, what are my meetings, those kinds of things. And that is very convenient for interactive experiences. But if you need to do analytics at scale, right, calling an API and calling an API on a per user basis, right, and making all these calls, it becomes complex very quickly. And so this is where Graph Data Connect was introduced to help you with that. And this particular new mapping template enables you to, right, not just get the data, right, in a form that is like the graph shape, hierarchical, right, and JSON form, which may not be the easiest to process from an analytical perspective, but it really allows you to actually automatically transform the data in a shape through ultimately, right, this particular ADF, Azure Data Factory flow, into a shape that is much more geared towards being ready for analytics. And so to show you a quick example, right, of what this looks like, right, this is kind of the output of I guess, a sample organization where you see that the data is actually not, right, hierarchical JSON objects, but as part of this template, the data lands in a form that is much more, right, structured and geared towards, okay, now you can run machine learning easily. Now you can run, right, analytics very easily. And the shape of the data is actually CDM standard entities. So you also have semantics that describes that data. And so underneath, right, this data is, right, as you execute such a template, is in an Azure Data Lake storage account, right? So all the data lands there. right? Your organization approved by your tenant admin, right, for certain analytical processing, right, and may exclude certain aspects of the data. But let's say you're approved for a certain project to, right, do analytics over relating your company's, right, emails with, right, for your sales organization, with your customers, right, and trying to find interesting communication patterns. And so, right, in Power BI, there's this new connector that we will release very soon, an enhancement of the data lake connector, which can connect to CDM folders directly and actually understand metadata. And so in this case, I'm just connecting to the underlying storage. And what I see is ultimately that, OK, in this particular case, right, the export ran, and I can just look at the data, right, in a form that is very much suited towards immediate analytics, and it's not, right, hierarchical JSON that I have to reshape and transform just to get to the parts that I want to. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Oleg to give a recap of, OK, lots of the things that we have covered in the last, I guess, 25, 30 minutes.
OK, I'm already over time, so I'm going to be real quick. So what you've seen before, by the way, great thanks for Robert for showing you a lot of things. This is a lot of work that gone through it, and you'll be surprised when you start to use it. It actually all works as advertised. OK, so, but what you've seen, you say, OK, guys, you've shown us lots of interesting software that does lots of things with CDM. How does it do it? How does all the Azure components and the Synapse and the Power BI and the connectors and all these things actually speak CDM? But the key is there is that we built, and we went into the public preview of that new version of CDM SDK. That CDM SDK is actually a set of libraries that were released in 4 different languages. In C#, is basically .NET, Java, Python, and TypeScript. Rings a bell? Remember all these different technologies using CDM? They are using these libraries. They are using the Microsoft-provided CDM SDK that is basically libraries that help you reason over metadata and help you create the metadata. So you don't have to do handcrafted JSON parsers and trying to figure out what each section of that means. You work with an object model pretty much the same way we do with everything else, and you can look at the CDM folder. For example, Robert mentioned and showed you actually the shape of the CDM folders and what they look like. What you do with the CDM SDK, you basically point it at that CDM folder, and it will enumerate you all the entities. It will give you the metadata for all the entities, including those rich semantics. So you do it in a programmatic way, the same way you normally work with object models that help you understand something else, so that you connect to. And we also come with all the other advantages so far, because we posted on our GitHub. It's free for you to use. It's open. So it's a great advantage for you to take advantage of. And we also have sample code. You don't need to figure it out. We have the documentation, references, and the sample code to go along with this SDK. And the key is that you will have a consistent experience with Microsoft first-party tools. And if you are an ISV, you can take advantage of that libraries to build in a technology of your choice the same capabilities regarding CDM as we have shown you. Isn't that exciting? Yeah, save the applause. Save the applause. There is not the get the CDM SDK. This is great. You love the slide, but go click on it, go get it, start using it, and there is an API reference to it as well. So start to use it, and all of the samples, no CDM SDK was hurt during making this video. We actually made use of CDM SDK in all the products that you've seen. Okay? And now to call to action. I'm not going to read the slide for you. Net, please click on it, read it, learn it. It's a great experience. Use it for your advantage. Build solutions. The main call to action is not only learn CDM, it's a means to an end. Build solutions that answer your business questions and get the most value of your data. Now you can applause.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great trip back home.